turned at any point towards anyone.
Got it. I could always reposition this a bit better. How about that? Is that helpful?
Can you guys all see that? All right. That's fine. I think.
You sure?
Yeah, Clive, don't worry.
All right.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you, Serge. Thanks for coming, speaking in our practitioner talk. Welcome to everybody on YouTube. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. And that's probably the last thing I need to do is record the Zoom, actually. Let's just do that. So many things to do. Let's press record, continue. Everyone press their got it buttons. Everyone see? Yes. Good. So thank you, Serge, from EY Seren. Over to you.
Great. Well, what time is it now? Afternoon, everyone. As Clive said, my name is Serge. I go by, well, my official name is Sergei, but I go by Serge. I'm I used to be a business design manager within EY Seren. As I sit more in a strategic element between service and business design, I'm now sitting within the service design practice. I've been with EY 8 years. 5 of those years have been at Seren. And I've been flying the flag for sustainable design and sustainable service design within Seren for a few years now as well. Kind of my experience includes developing a go-to-market strategy for a commercial worldwide bank, so a lot of research into the big trends in sustainability, and then what can they actually launch into the market, and how do they organize their business around that. I was also seconded to the Sustainable Markets Initiative and was part of the original kind of operations team there, helping design the terracotta seal, as it's now called, and recently worked with an oil and gas company to effectively shift cultural behavior from traveling a lot. Now, given COVID and post-COVID, nobody really travels anymore right now, but they're quite worried about as things open up, if they open up, people will start flying around again. So how do they get to think about their scope 3 emissions from a travel perspective? So that's kind of my experience. I'm interested in that interplay between innovation, sustainability, human behavior and psychology. Used to do, one of my degrees was in philosophy. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. So today I'm gonna cover 3 things. One is understanding why people don't always act sustainably. Kind of what in the field is called the intention action gap. 2 is help you guys understand different models of psychology, of behavior change. And 3 is explore how we can integrate these principles into the service design toolkit or into the wider design toolkit itself, and kind of go through 2 tools that we use as well, or evolution of those tools. So hopefully you won't forget these. Now, before we kind of dive into the overall presentation, just a couple of provisos or sanity checks to be aware of. First is this term that is known in mathematics. The map is not the territory. And that's effectively to say, what I'll be talking about are frameworks and tools, but they are just that. Human psychology is very deep and nuanced. Sustainability is a very complicated topic. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more beneath that. So don't take these as gospel. These are just that, maps that we can reuse and adapt as necessary. As mentioned, sustainability is a huge topic. For those who don't know what this is, the UN Sustainable Development Goals have 17 topic areas in sustainability, which are around everything from making sure marine ecosystems are safe to promoting peace and justice in countries and marginalized communities. So again, very nuanced, very complicated topic. When people say sustainability, they usually think of environmental biodiversity, but it also means social sustainability as well. Focus today is around incentivizing behavior and how to act or adopt sustainable outcomes. The focus isn't on how to develop sustainable products and services. I'm not a material scientist, nor do I have an industrial design background, so I can't help in that area. There's plenty of experts out there already. This is more around how do we get people to choose the sustainable product that you may create. And finally, I just realized I've not been on screen at all. Apologies for the other group. A lot of what I'll be talking about is around shifting behavior. And those in the design sphere, I've may come across the term dark design. If you've ever followed the scandals around Facebook and how they manipulate our behavior, this comes into topic and philosophy around legal paternalism of, how should we influence people? Whether do we have a right to influence them to choose the right or what we deem the right choice? Again, I won't be covering that. Suffice to say, in this case, I take it as acting sustainably is the moral right. If you want to argue that at another point, I'll be happy to. So without further ado, keeping all these things in mind, let me dive in. So as I said, is it going to change? Yeah. Sustainability it's reached a tipping point. Like everyone and anyone is talking about it. They recognize it. With COP26 in Glasgow, obviously the UK has been very, very hot on this agenda as well. And I know there's been a lot of discussions here with the likes of Johnny Ive and the SMI as well. Now, the thing is, the discussion around sustainability has been changing as well. This is kind of one of my favorite cartoons, which basically says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but at beautiful moments in time, we created a lot of value for our shareholders. So in the past, the discussion and discourse has always been around shareholder value. Now it is actually growing into recognizing, and the discussion is now about stakeholder value. So no longer focusing on just the bottom line and value there, but actually understanding the implications of businesses and their impacts on a variety of different stakeholders. Stakeholders being your consumer, your shareholder, but also your employee, also the community within which your business operates, and actually the wider supply chain with which your business can impact. Having said all this and actually loving this cartoon so much, at the end of the day, one thing to bear in mind though is businesses run on money, and therefore there needs to be some kind of value imperative in there. And the reason I say value, not money or profit, is because we can then rethink of how we think about value and designing for value. And then once we do that, we can understand how we can incentivize people to chase that value. So that's kind of the wider framework. But what, as I wanted to talk about kind of consumers and what they think, there's a ton of statistics out there, and you will always see some Forbes article writing about actually consumers are interested in value and sustainability. And, they talk about how consumers, I mean us, we consider it. We think about it when we go shopping. We are more likely to pay for sustainable products. And actually, we're more likely to talk about sustainable products with our friends and family, and word of mouth being a really key thing. The thing to bear in mind, though, unfortunately, is what people say is often different from what they do. Actually, almost 2/3 of people are deterred by the green premium that comes with sustainable products. The fact that me acting sustainably, for some reason, is more expensive in the short term, not including the kind of economic discussion around long-term savings. And therefore, that actually deters from my behavior. And there's a bunch of statistics. One of the other ones we've conducted at EY across 6,000 customers in 20 geographies found that only 1 in 5 individuals actually checks the sustainability credentials of a product or service. So greenwashing is a huge issue. And in the UK, get this right, the Council for Marketing Association, something like that, has actually published guidelines recently on greenwashing and the implications of that and the impact to businesses and what they should be aware of. But this difference between actually what people intend to do and what they actually do is called the intention action gap, or also known as the value behavior gap in psychology. And it is that difference between me committing to hitting the gym every day on the 1st of January to actually not bothering to ever go by the end of it. My intentions are there, but my actions are completely different. So as designers, part of our job is to bridge that intention action gap. Before we can do that, it is worth understanding what gets in the way of that, what actually causes that disconnect between somebody promising in their head and maybe to their friends that they will act in a certain way, but then falling back into other patterns of behavior. So to do that, we did an ethnographic study, I'm going to say it was April this year, with 10 people across the whole UK, from, there was a person in the Southwest all the way to Glasgow, varied demographics, old, young, from different ethnicities and genders, etc., and the socio-economic statuses, to understand, okay, how do they shop? How do they act sustainably? And we covered various aspects. We talked about household goods, so kind of toiletries, clothing, energy, how they think about food and drink, transportation, and a bit around tech and finance, because those are kind of important topics, but interestingly hard for certain people, hard in general, to understand the sustainability impact of those products and services. And we found a variety of different trends, factors, implications in this research, but I just wanted to focus on 6 of, I think it was 15 of them. They kind of fall down into 2 areas: motivation and ability or capability. So one is principles versus priorities. So yes, I have a principle to be sustainable, but as Steve in Edinburgh said, my focus is on my family here and now. COVID especially made people think about the today priorities as opposed to what could benefit somebody in another country, or what does it actually mean around emissions and coral deaths in Australia, for example. Yes, it's a great principle, do no harm, but when I actually am starving, I'm going to steal, for example. Another aspect was don't shift the blame on me. You'll see more and more a buildup of resentment in the kind of public psyche around where does the burden of responsibility lie. Too often the discourse has been it's a consumer imperative to be sustainable, not the business imperative. That is now changing. And one thing I know COP has been driving is a lot around this discourse between governments and regulators and businesses. This was the biggest COP where we had the biggest, this was the COP where we had the biggest turnout of businesses actually engaging in this discussion and recognizing that yes, the consumers are putting it back on them and they have to step in and do something. But this also then added to another aspect, which was this semblance of control. As an individual, my choices are a drop in the metaphorical ocean of sustainability. I don't have that feeling of control, of being able to have an impact on the world, therefore I'm not going to bother having an impact on the world. And I'll talk about the cynical mindset that this kind of leads to. So that's very much around motivation factors. On the ability side, actually, I'll start from the bottom up, making it real. What does it actually mean that when I choose a product or service, it saves 2 tons of CO2? Like, how do I visualize that and what that actually means? So one thing that made sustainability inaccessible to people is kind of seeing the tangible impact of their decisions and actions. Another aspect is once they kind of understood that, they may actually be very keen to be sustainable, but they don't actually know how they can be sustainable because a lot of the symbology, the terminology in sustainability really hides what's going on there. You turn over any packet, really should have had a slide on this, of let's say M&Ms or any kind of sweets or candy, and you'll see this triangular, we think, recycling symbol. That symbol doesn't mean recycling. Oh no, sorry, not that one. The one that looks like a yin and yang, the 2 arrows that you will see a lot. So people think that means recycling. All it really means is the company has contributed through your purchase to a recycling scheme. The product that you hold in your hand may not be recyclable at all. So there's an element around this, like what's the visibility of impact that people have? And finally, a really interesting topic that is all around that social and environmental overlay is how do we make sustainability accessible to all people in society, not just those well-off who can afford it? As I mentioned, the green premium that can arise with sustainable products. If you are a single parent with several kids, you don't have time or money to be healthy or considering a more sustainable option that may have a premium on it. You need to get the fast, simple, cheap option today. So if we want to drive sustainable behaviors, how do we ensure that we actually create it accessible for all members of society? So those are kind of some of the drivers that we found, and a lot actually talked about in the wider literature. By no means pretending that this is anything revolutionary. A lot of this has been written in parts by different scientists and researchers in the area. And one thing to kind of talk about is, well, we recognize that need for driving the right behavior, but how do we go about that? A lot of greater minds than us have thought about this, from Kant to Arendt to Confucius, about how do we drive humans to behave in what is deemed the right way. From I'm muted, so in case anybody in the room is, but no worries. So yeah, but how do we drive that behavior? How do we change it? And to that point, as designers, we have a huge say in this. All design is a choice by us to drive behavior. As an example, shout out to Will Shaw, so some of you may know, and come across, he talks about the chair. Like, how does this incentivize me to behave in a certain way? How do I look at this and think, okay, I understand how I may use this. The level of the chair, of the seat, comes at the point of my knees, so it's easier for me to sit down. The back is there representing or affording, in some languages, the opportunity for me to rest on it. Very trivial choice, okay? But then let's think about it wider. Privacy, for example. In EU, we have GDPR. In EU, we talk about cookies and a right to be tracked and not tracked. What was the design decision that came here, right? We see these all the time. So we have competing motivations. The EU and governments want us to actually get the user to think about, am I being tracked and why am I being tracked? The business wants you to actually accept cookies because that's good for them. And actually me as a user, I just want to get on with it. I want to get to the website. I can't be bothered with this. So somebody has tried to balance this and said, okay, well, here's a cookie setting. And they have made the most frictionless experience for the user, which is accept it and forget about it. And suddenly that whole, let's call it the moral imperative from the EU, is lost in this design. So how can we then as designers kind of get around this and engage in that discussion around getting people to do the right behavior? And this then leads into, it was a good example of how do we think about behavior change? There are many models out there. There is a really good one from kind of the policy sphere called the COMBI model, which is capabilities, opportunities, motivation, it's behavior. I forgot about this slide, that's why I need my notes. Behavior change kind of really came into the forefront of a lot of discussions in the public sphere from this book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein around nudge. So nudge economics, nudge behavior. You may all know about this technique that in the UK, organ donation is very low because we have an opt-in scheme. So how do we get people more involved in organ donations and being an organ donor? Well, set the baseline to be an opt-out process. And therefore, because we understand biases and how people behave, we can set policy to drive them into more societal beneficial outcomes. The guys in the behavioral insights team actually set up the behavior nudge unit in 10 Downing Street back in 2010, and then spun it out as a separate business, which is now called the BIT. And they use the COMBI model and a couple of other models. They've published something called the East Framework on the far right, which is talking about how you can, create interventions that are more likely to be taken up. Today, I'm just going to talk about the FOG behavior model, which is very similar to COMBI, which is behaviors all around motivation, ability, and prompts. Frankly, in my opinion, it's like the same as COMBI, but the only difference is it has a nice diagram that kind of helps us visualize that behavior change. So the BMAP model from FOG has two axes and another area. So the two axes are ability, how hard it is to do something versus how easy is it to do something, and motivation. How motivated am I to do it versus not. And then prompts is the reminders. Now, I understand or hope a lot of you guys are designers. So some of these things will come kind of easy to you to understand, but it's interesting to think about how we reframe the language to get us to think about these things in a different way. So ability or capability in the COMBI model, ask us around how can I do this? And this can have external factors such as, am I physically able to do this? Like if there's a lock on a door and I can't enter the building, I can't physically do this. Likewise, if there's no ramp for somebody with wheelchair requirements, they won't be able to participate as well. So think about that ability of can they engage from a physical perspective. However, there are also other external factors such as rules and regulations and laws. Is this permitted to be done? And therefore, I have the ability to do this. There's also internal factors, which are around knowledge and awareness. Do I know how to do this? You know, if you've created a new revolutionary product, but nobody has the ability to figure out your interface, well, they're not going to actually act and behave on it with all the will in the world. Motivation is, why would I do this? Again, this comes down to external, internal factors. External ones are, your culture, your community, aspects out there, be they your kind of community, what we mean by neighborhood, or be they community by what we mean by workplace community, and the norms of the industry that I'm in. It could be internal factors, such as those principles that we all hold here and our own aspirations, because I want to be seen as a leader in my community, or I will get recognized at work and get rewarded for it. These are different motivations then that you could play on to then get them to act in the area where you want them to be, as in crossing that action line from the intention to the action. And then finally, prompts, which we all see on a 24-hour basis, are those reminders to act and do something, but you can think of them as points of intervention or inspiration. So, excuse me. So all in all, quite a simple model, but then one that we can start applying to our design process from a sustainability perspective as well. And the way that we've started doing that in UI Seren is thinking of like, how can we start integrating this into our two favorite design tools, journey maps and personas. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you a kind of an updated client-focused journey map due to some IP restrictions. But the way I just want to talk about journey maps in this sense is you can think about both the abilities and motivation aspects at the front stage and the back stage. So at the front stage, what is it that's incentivizing your user to act in a certain way? And what ability do they have to act on that motivation? We talk about emotions in journey maps, but do we actually drive on what those emotions get the person to do, or why they have those emotions in the first place at all? So starting to reflect on that as a potential channel in a journey map. And actually that motivation channel is also really key if you're ever designing for internal services and processes. Quite a lot of what we do is actually around organization and cultural change in businesses. So understanding the motivational factors in a business, is it a pressure from a team due to time? Is it a certain process that's in place? Is it actually a regulation that's in place? Motivating certain behavior and actions. Or is it just this is the way we've always done this, and that's why I'm just copying the herd? Mention the kind of the abilities, the capabilities is kind of part and parcel of what we do as well. On the backstage, a lot of that kind of capability aspect and abilities can come down to, do I have the data to understand what the process is and what the business needs to achieve? And that element of data access is huge in sustainability right now. And also the verification of data, which is a completely separate topic, but authenticity and trust is paramount in this discussion. And again, motivation. Now, this can actually be a lot more high level than kind of the motivation of an individual. Motivation of the business can be like, what is its strategy? Is it purely focused on, again, that profit imperative, or has it started to integrate certain ESG elements and that discussion around stakeholder value more into its approach? And therefore, you can then help shift the behavior in that business to be aligned to those principles. And then finally, prompts. I would defer you to any manual that comes out of Facebook or social media, because those guys have cracked how to do prompts and how to incentivize habitual behavior. But it's about those reminders in the process, but also I would also get you guys to think about marketing and communications as a form of prompting and intervening outside. So as I'm walking in the street and I'm seeing a certain communications campaign, what is it prompting me to think about and to do? And how is it also relating to kind of my wider mental ecosystem, my friends, my family, and the things I value as well? So just an example around this kind of ability journey. One thing I mentioned is around the sense of transparency, understanding, is the product that I'm looking at, is it sustainable? Is the product good for me, good for the community? Is it made in a sustainable fashion? Because again, the back of a M&M's packet holds more information on branding than it does actually on how this was made. So there's a great app called Yuka, which you can download, and it answers this question by creating a frictionless service by making the ability to access all this information a lot easier. And it's focused on food and beauty products. So you can then just scan any product and it will give you a nice traffic lights score of whether this product is sustainable or not. So as a, let's say, a lay person in sustainability, this is just all I need to see. It's bad, fine, I'm going to avoid it. If I'm interested in diving more into this, it allows me the opportunity to actually explore how they got the score, what all these things mean. So very much focused on that ability access. Now on the motivation aspect, I still have to be motivated myself to get out of this. So then you can think about, okay, so how can they build a community around this and engaging with other people and being represented in that community? What's my next slide? Great. So another tool I want to talk about is mindset. So we learn a lot in service design around personas. Personas, kind of demographic snapshots of a user profile. I'm John, I'm 42, I have 2 kids. I'm interested in fast cars, but I work in a consultancy. And these are my opinions on food waste. Another great example from Will Shaw on this one. So shout out to Will. How do we think about food waste? Now, a persona perspective would see it as a static interaction with food waste. John's always going to behave like that when it comes to food waste. However, a mindset perspective is all around their mental state and what are their motivations and behaviors, but in different scenarios. So my mindset of me being at home with my family and how I'm going to think about food waste is completely different from when I'm at work and I'm time pressured and I just want to get disposable, I don't know, eat or pret and just throw it away when I'm done with it because I've got other things to worry about. So the way then that we interact with that mindset is different in those 2 scenarios. And a persona doesn't capture that information, while a mindset can help us then design intervention points and prompts based on those scenarios. So what we did with our kind of ethnographic study is we created 4 high-level mindsets around sustainability, ranging from the cynic, who sees sustainability as just signal nurturing by companies, may not even believe that global warming is real, but is motivated by their family, their community, to someone, let's say, who's ambivalent, that doesn't actually care about this topic. They might think it's true, but actually they have other priorities, which are my current lifestyle. I need to optimize that, be it because I'm struggling financially, or I'm just, let's say, a hedonistic pleasure maximizer. And then finally, advocates are your Captain Planets. They're your champions of sustainability who consciously make an effort to be sustainable and incorporate it. They are your early adopters. They are motivated by having a positive impact on the planet. So the way that I would deal with a cynic, or actually forget the cynic for a second, an ambivalent is completely different from an advocate, because there's different motivating factors there. And it doesn't matter if they could be the same person at any one time, because I could be an advocate in a room in front of you all to show how sustainable I am, but actually I'm a bit ambivalent when I'm having dinner with my friends and I don't really care where the food has come from. So how we kind of built the mindsets was to create different criteria and questions around sustainability, and then see how they reflect and pull those patterns. So a cynic, interesting, we talked about awareness of sustainability. So some cynics would say they're very knowledgeable on this topic because they actually focus on the 3% of scientists who claim that global warming isn't real, or global warming is not man-made. But on what we found was they're maybe more on the unknowledgeable side of the actual science behind it. Where is their focus when they make a decision? They're actually more present, focused on today, as opposed to thinking about the future. How do they evaluate their choices? Are they kind of individualistic, what benefits me or my immediate circle, versus communitarian, kind of my wider community, and so on. And some of the interesting things we found was, okay, with a cynic, don't engage with them on the sustainability topic at all. Show them what the benefit of the product or service is to them and why it's better than the unsustainable choice, and talk about themes of community and the economy. So what you sometimes see in a lot of McKinsey publications is, well, the circular economy is I'm going to pull this number out, but it's something like in the magnitude of trillions of dollars of opportunities for the global economy. That's an incentive for the cynics to be like, fine, this benefits us economically, I'll go for this. Another thing is actually architect out the choice. Like, why do they have to choose between an unsustainable or a sustainable product? Just make everything sustainable. And then they don't even have to engage in this discourse. Yeah, so those were some of the ideas of kind of, as opposed to what motivates them, is how can you intervene and design around them. And just at the risk of death by frameworks, so there are also, so the ways you can intervene and change behavior, multiple methods. One that comes from a marketing and experience perspective is called the SHIFT framework from Catherine White et al. Focuses on these kind of 5 areas of how can you get people to shift their behavior and what you can focus on. Most of these are around motivation and not ability. The ability one we've kind of already discussed a bit, but social influence is huge. So is it a social norm to behave in a certain way? Is it socially aspirational to behave in a certain way? So a Tesla did not compete on it being the most sustainable car. It competed on being the most aspirational vehicle you could own because it's cool, it's innovative, it's sleek. That became a symbol of wealth and status, but a Trojan horse for people to get into electric vehicles and therefore drive more sustainable behaviors in our society. Funnily enough, though, think about Tesla versus accessible sustainability then, and green and electric public transport and what the incentives are there. Habit formation, again, like how can you create habits of using a product or services and rewarding and incentivizing people through that? Or how do you de-incentivize people through penalties? Regulations, tax are huge disincentives. And we're seeing, for example, now discussions around removing governmental subsidies for coal and fossil fuels. There's a huge habit-breaking technique then of relying on fossil fuels. Oh, that's not good.
Stop sharing.
All right, it looks like I may have dropped out. There with us, folks. You don't mind just posting on the Zoom that seem to be have dropped off number.
So again, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done. Yeah. I think you guys can still. No,
We're still on that Zoom.
yeah. Okay, great. All right. It's just loaded up.
Thanks for your patience. Slight Zoom drop.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to end there on the slide because that was the last slide. But yeah, I'll go to questions. But the shift framework also had the individual self.
I think that was you. You're okay now?
Okay, sorry. So the other thing is individual self. So how can you align the product to be aligned to the principles that a person may hold? Feelings and cognition. It's a very marketing area around how can you create positive emotions around using a specific product or service. And finally, tangibility. I mentioned this right at the beginning, is how can you make something as real as possible? So an example, CO2 emissions, I don't get. The amount of trees that are cut down because of this, I do get. And that also has an emotional aspect. Let's say me installing solar panels today, all I see is the cost of doing that, but I don't actually see the savings over 10 years. So then getting that tangible impact of, well, if you install them today, this is the amount of money you'll save over 10 years versus not doing it. Again, making it tangible and bringing future benefits closer in proximity to the company. So that's another way you can then get people to think about, all right, I am profit incentivized. I will go after this because I see money saved, even if it's 10 years away. And that, I think, was the last bit I wanted to talk about. And I had a slide that said, that's all, folks. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, everybody online. Thanks, everybody in the room. Thank you, sir. Get your questions ready. I do think that was a masterclass in behavioural science, and so unbelievably appropriate to our service design projects. And when we look at the project, you've got a mixture of first and second years here, by the way, and also online. I shall get my laptop in a second and watch the chat. Does anyone in the room have any immediate questions or reactions for Sarah? Yeah.
So a lot of these frameworks you do use during the design creation of exams, but is there any of these that you use internally to motivate the team to think this way? Like what is it that you do internally as a team to go towards a more sustainable thought creation?
Yeah, so the more and more I think about sustainability, it's take the analogy of how do you motivate more people to be digital, for example, like the digital revolution or the industrial 4.0 that was all talked about a couple of years ago is analogous to the sustainability revolution. So sustainability isn't going to be a separate thing. It's just going to be the way things are done, the way that nowadays we always think about how we digital, how we online. So I would, I'm by no means a cultural change expert, but some basic things like, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve? So aligning around the central mission and vision. And then, as with, no doubt you guys have come across SMART goals.
Yes.
So how do you make that sustainability goal SMART and then track it? As I said before, data is key to sustainability. mean, the whole thing lives and breathes on us understanding what impact we're having, and therefore being able to measure it to then decrease it. As that Peter Drucker phrase that I'm going to butcher, which is if you can't measure it, you can't change it. So yeah, I think from a motivational perspective, if people aren't motivated by this lofty goal of being sustainable, well then motivate them by saying how much money can we make out of this.
Very good. Anyone else? Yes.
I wonder, since there's a gap between the action and the awareness of people, even if we make our service more clear or more real for users, still their choices to take the action. So how to measure the value of our service? We can aware of the what's the good of our service, but it's still their choices to take the action.
So if I got it right, we might kind of communicate a lot, but how do you measure the kind of the jump from intention to action? Sorry?
So if they didn't take the action, how to measure the true value?
So measuring inaction.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's a good question. I'll be honest, I don't have an answer off the top of my head for that one. I think I'll probably lean towards kind of the spheres of social media around engagement, and a lot of our kind of marketing capabilities focus on awareness building, or the funnel effectively of like awareness and engagement and sort of conversion. So I would say look at how they think about getting their message out and thinking about their reach versus conversions to a normal product, such as whatever the thing you see on Instagram, for example, and it's advertising to you. Like they can measure eyeballs on that page, and they can measure who actually buys that product. So there's a lot of kind of lessons learned from that area. I think the other side of it is why they didn't do that, because that's only telling you what they did, not why. That unfortunately still comes down to traditional methods of ethnographic research, user interviews, and understanding kind of what I talked about, like the drivers and behaviors there.
I think having just done the lecture to the second years on impact, we talked a bit about weak signals.
Yeah.
You know, it might be something on social media, it might be have you downloaded something and then you use it and you slowly build up some kind of data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, that's not kind of an area I can really answer. But the one thing I would say in this topic as well is, so one of the themes we found, well, we call it like the Netflix effect, you can call it the Attenborough effect, but sustainability kind of, the discourse in the public sphere has these peaks and troughs where whatever latest emotional, hard-hitting documentaries come out, it will drive a lot of discussion and awareness, but then you'll see it taper off of, okay, fine, enough people found out that I'm vegetarian, I'm not pescatarian because I see as fishing is too much. But a lot of people saw that, thought it's bad, and then they realized, actually, I still like taste the fish, so I'm going to go back to that. So on that kind of awareness state, there's like peaks and troughs. But what you can also do is then think of where is that kind of social peak coming, and can you then push your product or service at that kind of maximum point of discourse?
Good. Good question. Thank you. Anyone want to take it? Isha.
A lot of what you mentioned actually was kind of formed the basis of my dissertation. And time and again, I came across this entire thing about why sustainable, like every discourse around sustainability is so, it focuses on the individualization of responsibility. So I have a couple of questions around this. One is, how do you really create collective responsibility instead of all of this boiling down to one consumer's choice when they go to the market? And the other is also about, I actually read a lot about Catherine White's research as well. So my question's around feelings and cognition, because a lot of consumers feel that they feel a lot of pressure, and even feelings of guilt and pride are used to actually moderate sustainable choices. So how do you alleviate some of that pressure into, instead of letting people feel paralyzed actually make them more proactive?
Yeah, no, great point. So first question is, how do we not just think of it as the burden of the individual? And the second one is, how do we shift towards more positive emotions? So on the first one, I mean, it's a kind of a, it's going to sound trite, but it has just a whole layer of depth to it. But my personal opinion, without kind of antagonizing anyone, is I was going to say like atheistic religion. So basically, how can you create communities and shared values that people get behind and see themselves as part of? So you see this in times of crises. We want to help people, and we band together and we go out, irrespective of what our personal beliefs might be, but we feel a part of community and our right to help. I think that to get away from that individualistic perspective, it will come down to 2 points. One is, I know, a rightful backlash against the discourse that was created in the 70s and 80s by the, and you're seeing a lot of this right now in the news around the oil and gas industry of saying it's the individual's responsibility, and a push towards governments and businesses owning that. That's going to be one aspect, so there's less pressure on it's your obligation. But another factor is like getting back to moving away from a individualistic, I'm going to sound like a proper anarchist here, but like an individualistic capitalist mentality and moving towards more like community. So I'm doing something for the benefit of everyone and empathizing more as opposed to just for myself. So that first layer of social pressure within the shift framework is all around how do we flip that lever higher of getting people to recognize the communities that they're in, who they identify with, and then how their behaviors can benefit that side. So I'll just answer the second one. So the second question around moving away from guilt and let's say negative emotions to more positive emotions. On the one hand, yes, if you make everyone feel too guilty, they'll just switch off. But I think in certain cases with certain mindsets, it's still a good technique. It needs to be balanced around other mindsets where actually other perspectives may work. But there's a hard, real truth in this, and there's unfortunately certain actions and behaviors are going to cause harm. Guilt will play a factor into this. I mean, I agree it needs to reduce, but I don't think it will ever disappear.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I had a question about like paternalism in general, like the kind of ethics of behavior change. Because again, like a designer at Facebook would think that I'm connecting people and I'm creating social networks, but then they call depression in preteens. So how do we sort of like, if you're taking this route of changing behaviors, acting paternalistic in that sense, how do we prevent it from going dark or going bad? Because it can very easily, like, because if you're influencing behavior, there has to be some moral responsibility on you.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one thing you will see a lot, was watching this discussion, I think it was yesterday. No, it was today. One of our colleagues was talking about this at the Carbon 13 Startup Accelerator. Sustainability is going to become a political point. It is already one, but it's going to become one massively. And one way you see it is that legal paternalism as a form of control. And actually, by getting governments to think about and getting us to act sustainably, it's an authoritarian, autocratic state suddenly. I mean, there's no answer I can give you in the 5 minutes that I have, let alone 3 days of discourse. I think it comes down to a couple of factors. One is transparency and awareness of that. Two is education, not just education of the topic, but education of kind of the meta topic, which is the philosophy around this, as in what is legal paternalism? What are the moral obligations of changing behaviors in crowds and society? But on the other hand, I also think, like, is it a point when the same backlash around wearing masks that we have today, we have with using seatbelts in cars, right? And actually, with enough time and habit, people realized actually seatbelts are a very smart idea. So yes, it can go down the dark way of manipulating people into things that may be bad, but I think there is potentially some objective truths that we can agree is actually this is better for us to do this, so we might as well just get everyone to do it. I'm conscious I've answered a lot of in-room discussions. If there's anything on the chat,
There's nothing on chat at the moment. Our Zoom attendees are letting me down. But if anyone's got anything, we're probably sort of in the territory of final question. If not, or if there's any more here, pop round to see who's around the corner. Yes, really, yes.
I don't have one really well formed as of now, but you mentioned communities and some people being very community-led. That got me thinking that there are so many commercial apps nowadays, and almost all of them focus on like this one community aspect. They'll have that one button for community. The problems that they're trying to tackle yet exist. So who has actually harnessed the potential of a community well, and what does that mean? Especially when it comes to commercial services.
Give me some examples, perhaps, communities,
Sort of,
commercial.
yeah.
I'm just really saying that so the mics can hear it. Really.
Yeah. Okay. So which communities exist out there? I mean, good question. I think at the highest level. Sorry.
No, I just said Reddit, like it just organizes communities so well, like of people with it.
Yeah. So there's this long tail of niche communities, and everyone can identify with a certain group, which to some extent, not always a good thing. I mean, yes. I mean, Reddit's a great example of facilitating that joining together. I mean, from a commercial aspect, nation states. You can look at how do they build communities. I've always been slightly in awe of, let's say, Nordic countries and Nordic mentality around how they've created communities. However, saying that, they have benefited from isolationism, and there are a lot of issues right now with immigration and changing community practices. Crikey, as a customer experience consultant, I can't really think of one off the fly without some of these really old examples, which I don't want to mention. I mean, Tesla was one example as well. I wouldn't say that they are a community, but they're very brand aligned to the extent that there are still people waiting to buy secondhand ones and kind of having discussions around that as well. Another area that I would look at, and I would put a huge proviso on this because I'm one, not an expert, and two, it can get very complicated, but looking at a lot of kind of the new digital communities that are arising out of NFTs, because that is one way that they have been able to monetize community creation as well. And yeah.
Some quite interesting stuff. I'm just looking at Disciple, who are kind of a slightly different thing that they're creating.
I'm ominous already.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, they're more like closed communities for people who don't want to be on Facebook, basically.
Yeah, so there's a huge area in, and this is all kind of social media of I can't know what the term is, but it's like decentralized community networks.
Exactly.
There's DAOs as well.
DAOs.
Yeah. DAOs.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, for those, I'm not an expert nor have dipped my toe in this, but the crypto community people, is it decentralized?
Autonomous something.
Autonomous organizations. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I read in the news today that one of them is trying to buy a NBA team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, I think we've probably had our money's worth.
I hope so.
From you said. I just want to say hi to anyone watching the recording or live streaming right now on YouTube. This is the hybrid world we live in, where we're kind of in the studio in the RCA. It's a beautiful day in Kensington. Fantastic for you to join us. Everyone online, thank you for joining us. But before everyone leaves, big round of applause to Sergei. Absolutely fantastic talk. Thanks everyone for joining us. And thank you, sir.
No worries. And apologies for those online. It's not as easy doing the hybrid presentations. Apologies for showing my back all the time.